Hi guys, I'm Shmee, hello and welcome back to the channel where some exciting news. We are now about a week away from the Shmuseum. I cannot wait, there's still a lot to be done, but stay tuned for that very soon. Today though, I want to talk about EVs and the costs of actually running them, charging them and using them, and in some cases, the surprises. Now I plunged myself in at the deep end buying a Taycan Turbo S, but considering the direction the entire automotive industry is heading, I felt as a petrol head, it wouldn't be right to try and experience a bit of that EV world, and so far I have driven the car about 2,000 miles. There have been some highs where it's all been perfect, there have been some frustrating lows where things haven't worked as I would have liked, but today I want to run over some of the numbers from my side, my experiences of charging up and using the Taycan Turbo S in comparison to some other, let's say, equivalent cars, with some of the recent frustrations and some of the recent positive experiences to tell you about as well. The plan today is to take the Taycan out to go and get it charged up here in central London because it's currently sitting on about 20%, which was not by intent. Now before we get too much into it, I'm sorry for boring to death the regular viewers amongst you. Why don't I charge the car up here at home? Well, we've got electricity, we've got lights, but unfortunately because I rent the spaces, I can't install a permanent charger and I don't have access to a 3-pin main socket or anything like that. So alas, for the time being, I have to use destination chargers and charging on the road. However, in the boot of the car itself, I do actually have the C-Tech charger that we're going to be installing in the Shmuseum, which is going to make all of this just a little bit easier. Now, over the last week, I've had two different experiences at polar opposite ends of the spectrum. One very good, one really not so good. So I left the other day for a 250-mile drive. Now, remember the range on this, the realistic range, is about 175 miles, and I started with somewhere in the 70s in terms of the percent, so I knew I couldn't get there and back, obviously, in one charge. But what I did, because I was running ahead of schedule, was stop for a quick top up at a rapid charger on the way, about 12 or 13 minutes. Then when I was on the way back, I got it all the way down to 9% before charging it up to 95%, and that 9 to 95 took 45 minutes. I arranged to have a call while I was there, so basically no wasted time at all, and got back home with exactly the same amount of charge I had left with, and those kind of experiences are brilliant. It's very easy, very comfortable, that calm, quiet, effortless drive along the way. However, since then, I've had a couple of little errands driving around town, a few shorter journeys, and the other day I tried to charge it up, went to one place, out of service, no luck, went to another space, again, out of service, no luck. This is one of the only electric vehicle charging stations actually near to central London, but the two cones spell that there was going to be a problem, pulled in and came to have a look nonetheless. This machine, as you can see, completely out of order. This machine appears to be functioning correctly from what you can see, but alas, when you try this and actually give it a go, it is not to be the case. Take this, go and plug it in, see if we can get that wedged in, slightly awkward as always, and you will see finished return plug. Alas, that is a complete no-go for charging using this machine. The most frustrating thing is that that is not a unique experience. In fact, I've had a number of occasions already where I've turned up to chargers that have been out of service and you have no idea of it in advance. I've turned up to others where there have been long queues, and if you're queuing for a petrol pump, you wait 5 to 10 minutes for the car in front to fill up, to go and pay, and then to depart. With an EV, you have no idea how long it's going to be, whether somebody needs a quick charge, or whether they need to go all the way from nearly empty up to full, and it could take, for example, an hour. So it's a very different mindset. You always have to have a plan B to be ready to deviate from your original intentions, which is quite a different approach to motoring. Now, the thing that also varies significantly from place to place is the infrastructure. In countries like Norway or in the Netherlands, there's a very highly developed EV charging infrastructure. Here in the UK, we have some very aggressive targets in terms of preventing the sales of purely internal combustion engine vehicles, moving towards hybrids in 2030, moving to pure EV in 2035. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done with the infrastructure infrastructure first. For example, here in the centre of London, a lot of people like me live in an apartment building and keep cars in an underground garage, rented spaces without the ability to charge them up. A lot of others live in houses with no driveways, with cars parked on the narrow streets and the sides, and again, you can't have cables running to every single car, so again, there are limited charging opportunities. And this is quite a problem because it means we have to go to destination chargers, to rapid chargers preferably, and there aren't very many of them. Now, last time out, I went to the Ionity charging station in Beaconsfield, about 20 miles away, outside of the M25, and a lot of people said, well, why don't you go to any of the city centre ones? Now, the short story there is that there aren't really very many of them. The nearest to where I am is up in Kilburn, where you saw before, machines out of service, not the first time I've seen that there. The second nearest is to go to Hammersmith to a BP, where they have 5 stations, but unfortunately, it's become a very frequent place for EV taxis to charge, and there are always queues basically. There are a couple more around in Wembley, Old Kent Road, up towards the east, but none of them are very convenient, and it's quicker to drive 20 miles out of the city than charging up inside town, potentially having the risk of queues and machines not working, which is a complete and total mess if you ask me. So I'm very much looking forward to having a fixed charger in the Shmuseum and being able to keep it charged up. But primarily today, I do want to talk about the costs that I've experienced so far charging this on the road, but also a bit of a comparison with, well, my other Porsche, the Cayman GT4, but also with my previous Ferrari GTC4Lusso, a Ferrari with a V12. And I think you might be surprised by some of the numbers. So for the moment, let's hop in the Taycan, head on over to the charger, and let's run through some of these costs. Thankfully, the traffic today for central London has not been bad at all, and we're just about a mile away now from the Hammersmith charger, from finding out, 1, if there's a queue, and 2, how quickly it is going to run. But I know a few of you will be wondering, why am I still persisting with this car, given some of the experiences that I've had and been sharing to date, some of which have not exactly been the best? Well, I know when I bought the Taycan originally, there were people who thought I was a traitor to petrol heads buying an EV and wanted to unsubscribe from the channel and thought there was no chance I would still have this car after 3 months. Well, here we are, 8 months down the line, 2,030 miles on the clock, and while not everything has been perfect, I think this is part of a bigger story. Whether petrol heads like myself and you guys like it or not, this is going to be the future. Things are taking an electric direction, governments are setting legislation to promote it and push it, and therefore OEMs are putting all of their research and development budgets into EVs, into enhancing this technology, and in a decade or 2, we will pretty much all be driving EVs in some form or another. Now, here in the UK, as I said, they're being particularly aggressive in terms of the deadlines and time frame, but I think others will follow suit, and it is improving very, very quickly. There is no question about that, but there's a lot still to be done. And for me, a big part of trying this out is knowing that it's coming. I want to have an experience of it myself. I'm not an early adopter. EVs have been around now for quite a while, and in fact, the number that are being bought is increasing dramatically on a very, very, very quick basis. But we're still in the early stages of the network, of the infrastructure, and of all understanding this, and that's why I want to share these experiences. You never know, if I have problems, those might actually trigger things to be improved and fixed and made right, and that, if you ask me, is going to be a good thing at the end of the day. So I've sat down as well to do some, I guess, analysis in a way, some of the costs behind combustion engine cars, behind using an EV as I do, charging with the rapid chargers on the go, but also home charging and looking at the Tesla network as well, which I know a lot of people ask me about as well. But here we are in the Taycan, nearly, well, the best part now of a year later. I don't see this car going anytime soon, to be honest, because it's a really enjoyable drive. And this is the perfect example, really. Just a gentle cruise. It's calm, it's quiet, it's a lovely thing. And with the Porsche InnoDrive, the adaptive cruise control, obviously for your speed, but also the lane assist to keep you in your lane comfortably, you just have to lightly hold the steering wheel. It's a very, very enjoyable car for long distance driving. I'm not gonna lie, I can't wait to try a road trip with it. I've talked about that a few times. Obviously, we'll need to plan ahead in terms of the chargers, but we now have about 3/4 of a mile until we get to this location, and I'm hoping that we're not going to have to queue for a while, but we will find out in the very near future. But either way, it's all part of the EV experience. This is it then, let's find out. And I've just got the please monitor range icon popping up as well. That means, I think, 15%. Unfortunately, we have a little bit of a queue. There are plenty of open fuel pumps, but I think, yeah, there are 4 fast chargers here and 1 slow one. The slow one is, of course, the one that is currently vacant. And this is the thing. I didn't know until I got here what the situation was going to be. Yes, there are 4, so it helps a little bit. There's only, I think, 1 car. Well, there are 2 cars. There's 1 car in front of me, at least. And it's going to be a waiting game. And this is EV life, unfortunately. And it's one of the biggest problems, in my opinion. If you're out of town, the fast chargers tend to be in awkward locations. And if you're in town, there just aren't enough of them in terms of the actual number at each spot and enough actual physical locations close to the centre of London. And yes, it's old infrastructure, there isn't the space or the cabling to do it, but this has to improve for this to work, because who wants to come and sit here? I don't know right now if I'm going to be here for half an hour or if I'm going to be here for 2 hours. And I've got the time today and I've got plenty of work I can do on my phone. I've got my laptop with me as well, so it's totally fine for me. But this puts people off. This absolutely puts people off. When we do get forward though and we get it charging, I will start running through some of these numbers that I've calculated so I can give you more of a picture of all of this. I've been here so far for about 25 minutes. 1 car shuffled forwards very soon after my arrival, and thankfully the car on the end has just departed, so I can pull this up and go and get the process started. All right, we are parked up here, car off. Let's go and get this plugged in. One other comment is that the chargers are never undercover, which, were it to be raining, makes this quite an unpleasant experience. When we come round, because we've got the fast charger on this side, of course with the Taycan you have a charger on both sides of it, but as always you have to pull right to the front and risk your carbon fibre. I need the CCS for this car in particular, which is always a bit of a struggle to stretch over to these things, but we can get that in. I've got a hang of it now, but it's never the easiest thing in the world. It currently says something that I know is not true, because it says 80%, and we definitely don't have 80%, so that's the previous person. So we'll need to start this. For me, this particular one is a minimum of 1 pence per session, 42 kilowatts. That's not too bad. We'll touch more on the exact pricing and things in a moment. We'll just press start, waiting. Hopefully it will take my card. This drives me nuts. That machine has not worked for me. Thankfully somebody else is just leaving, and I am going to try and move to a different machine, because this is a complete pile of fail. I've tried multiple different credit cards, absolutely none of them being accepted. Complete and total joke. So around we go. Let's try the other one. It is round 2. I'm not sure what was going on there. I suspect that there might be a little glitch happening in terms of the payment side at the moment. All of this fiddly walking around everything all the time, the cables and various bits and pieces, but let's give it a go. Let's grab this, first select your output, 1 CCS, go and connect it, pull this around, sirens going past, try and force that in, there we go. That is in some kind of position. Come around here, connect OK. Oh, nearly fall over. Start, yep, card payment, that's what we want. I can tell you one difference immediately. We've got green lights instead of red lights, so let me do this. Is it going to have detected my card? Please wait. Maximum, let's say £10? No, £30. Okay, so that means it should, you're allowed to start charging. That is good news right now. Preparing to start. And we're rocking and rolling up to 15%. It was down to 14. The first bit of power delivered, charge delivered. So let's see how long this is going to take. In the meantime, I want to tell you about some of the costs of doing all of this. It has to be said, this is charging pretty quickly. It's been plugged in for probably 15 minutes or so, and we're now up to 53%. Now, one interesting thing about charging is that the emptier your battery is, the faster it charges. Now, a car like this can go up to around 270, I think, kilowatts. At the moment, we're charging at just over 100, because that's the limit that kicks in at 52%. So just before now, it was running at 118, which is not too bad, but obviously less than half what the car can technically do. When you then get to 80%, 90%, 95%, it gets increasingly slower, and in fact, that last 5% isn't really worth bothering with. It just takes a little bit too long. So the battery in this car is 93.4 kilowatt hours. The usable battery, critical figure, is 83.6 kilowatt hours. That would be your 0 to 100%, so it always has something in reserve. But the real world usable battery is that you never run it to 0% and you never really charge it up to 100%. So you're talking about 85% of that, or something like 75 kilowatts that you're actually going to charge up, which takes you a total, from my experience so far with this car, of about 175 miles. So around half the equivalent combustion engine vehicle between complete charges that are needed. And of course, this is still early days in the technology, and it would be very easy if you can charge at home. But now we're already up to 55%, and I have a little cheat sheet of notes to run over some of the numbers here and talk a little bit more about these costs, because I find it fascinating to compare this to filling up a petrol car. And the two cars in particular I want to talk about are my Porsche 718 GT4, being a Porsche, being a premium vehicle, and also my former Ferrari GTC4Lusso, which was very equivalent in terms of power, purpose, and I guess positioning in the market. Now, if you fill up here in the UK a petrol car or diesel, we have very high, well, like the rest of Europe, very high taxes, levies and surcharges, so it's significantly more expensive than over in the USA. It's about 2.5 times the price, in fact. So when I did my tour with the GT500, it was very fun how cheap the petrol was in comparison to what we spend here. So at the moment here in the UK, to fill up at one of the service stations on the motorway, a premium fuel, of course, we're talking premium vehicles, you would pay at the moment about £1.47 versus £1.33 for premium fuel at a fuel station that's off the main road for your gas. So it's quite a big difference. And also, confusingly, a US gallon is 4 litres and a UK gallon is 4.55 litres, which throws a lot more confusion into this, but I'm using UK figures across the board, so it is different to US miles per gallon. Now, I'm very addicted to monitoring my mileage, tracking the numbers, very nerdy about it all, and my GT4 so far has averaged 22 miles per gallon. In the 10,000 miles or so I did in my GTC4Lusso, it averaged 16 miles per gallon. Those figures with motorway fuel prices would equate in the GT4 to 30 pence per mile for fuel, and the Lusso at 42 pence per mile. If you fill up somewhere a little bit more cheaply, like off the main roads, you'd be paying 28 pence per mile for the GT4 and 38 pence per mile for the GTC4Lusso. Now remember those numbers. When it comes to the Taycan, as I said, your real world 75 kilowatt hour battery for about 175 miles. If you come somewhere like this, you're paying 42 pence or 41 pence at the Shell I showed you earlier, which means realistically you're going to spend about £31 on your full charge up. That equates to about 17 pence per mile. Now that's a little bit cheaper, as you can see, but it's not hugely cheaper than the 28 pence per mile in the GT4. There are places like the new grid serve locations which are currently doing 24 pence per kilowatt, which equates to just 10p per mile, but I slightly fear those are introductory rates and are quite likely to increase in the future. In fact, that's a big topic for just in a moment. The interesting thing though is that the equivalent of filling up with premium fuel on a motorway is going to one of the ultra rapid chargers like the Ionity system from Porsche and a number of other brands, and at those with no membership they cost 69 pence per kilowatt, which means you would spend £52 on a charge up, which means it would cost you 30 pence per mile compared to 28 pence per mile in the GT4, or I should say 30 pence per mile as well in the GT4 for premium on the motorway services. You do get with a Taycan a membership subscription, and when that expires you can renew it for £200 a year, which is hard to factor in because it depends how much mileage you do, and that does significantly reduce the price of the Ionities down to 30 pence per kilowatt, which would mean more like 13p per mile. Now all of these charging figures are based on current prices because it's quite likely down the line that when people aren't filling up their petrol cars and then there is no longer the tax revenue being generated from those taxes on the actual fuel, it's probably going to transfer to this, to adding charges to the cost to fill up the missing income stream to the National Treasury. So that is definitely something I think we need to watch in the future. Now the ultimate win is if you can charge at home on a night tariff with prices going as low as actually 5 pence per kilowatt, because if you're doing that and you're charging up a small city car, let's say, that doesn't lug around the weight of the batteries and the size that this does, you're going to be getting about 2p per mile, and then you're winning. That is effectively the ultimate result. It's much more expensive if you're charging in the day. One of these being charged in the day, you'd be looking at more like 10p per mile, but still much cheaper than coming to one of these charging stations. The thing that I just find fascinating though is if you're charging this at the full price at the moment, the 69 pence, and I fear that will quite quickly become the norm as VAT gets added properly and new taxes and levies come in. Basically you're charging at 30 pence per mile, which is the same as filling the GT4 with premium fuel, and obviously a little bit less than the 42 pence of the Lusso, but without the screaming V12 in the background. So the concept of the EV being significantly cheaper is again only relevant if you can charge at home overnight. And that's one of the big takeaways I hadn't really considered before. I knew charging at these machines would be much more expensive than charging at home, but I didn't realize how much more it would be, and that it would end up costing about the same that it did to run my V12. Now there are many more topics that connect to this as well. Depreciation, brakes, the Tesla world we need to talk about a little bit as well, the future. There are cheaper things like parking. You get discounted parking here in London, you just have to pay the first 10 minutes and you can get the maximum time if that's 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever it is, and you can have exemption from the daily congestion charge, which is a very nice perk as well. But all of this is for now. The congestion charge perk will go in 2025, so only a couple more years. The parking, I'm sure, will expire and change as well. So all of these things are going to change, and if you can't charge at home, it's not particularly cheap. That's the main takeaway here. After about 35 minutes of charging, we're now at 90%. It claims 198 miles of range, so as I said earlier, giving a little bit of room at the bottom, the last 10%, that is about 175 miles real world, and you can see the rate of charge is going down as well, 55 or so kilowatts at the moment, but dropping down quickly, and then when it gets to 95%, that really starts to grind down to a halt. But while we're here, while we're plugged in, while everything is working, I am going to make the most of it, try and get it up to 95%, maybe see if I have any patience to go a little bit further before driving onwards back home. But there are some more things I'd like to talk about to do with the Taycan, also to do with Teslas, because I'm sure many of you are wondering about that. We haven't really touched on it up to this stage, but you can see quickly the charging rate starts to fall off a cliff as it gets that touch extra reserve in the battery. I'll leave it as long as I can before we depart onwards. Well, it's time to get this unplugged, because not for the first time, have a look at this. Charging error. The car detected a problem. We're at 93% though, so I'm happy with that. Cost me about £30 there, not too bad. Could be far worse. So to disconnect this, usual, press the button, wiggle it out, that will close itself up automatically. We'll pop this back away, and while it does tell you the kilowatt hours delivered and the charge times, you can see 42% to have gone from 14% to 93%. You don't really focus on that or take in basically what it means. Anyway, that's all good. Leave it ready for the next person. I will squeeze around here. There's never enough space. Like I said earlier, no canopy, like filling up with fuel. You're left to the elements should the weather be less than ideal. Anyway, good enough for now. Let's hop in. Let's take this back onwards and get back home. It is kind of funny because even today, I've gone to not my local charger because that one is out of service. I've sat in a queue before I've been able to charge. I've had a machine that didn't work, and I've had a failure error at the end that stopped it a little bit sooner than I would have done otherwise. That's not like one thing that's gone wrong, and this is really my experience up to this point. You can't predict how this is going to go. It's kind of a lucky dip. Will it work? Won't it work? When I've got the car charged up and I can use it now for some short journeys around town, some shorter drives and things, and it will last, you know, another week or two depending how many miles I do, that's when it's fantastic. And to be honest, it's best when I'm going out of London and I can charge somewhere on the way, a high-speed, reliable charger, and there are some great ones, Instavolt in Banbury, Ionity in Milton Keynes. I've had a number that I've stopped at and used depending which direction I'm actually going in. But for charging and using around town, it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. These things should not still be going wrong. And that's a big part of the problem. Ignore the fact that the costs are actually higher than you think they're going to be if you can't charge at home. It's the fact that it's not reliable that really gets me about all of this. And I hope that gets better before long. I really do. It's funny how when you're driving an EV, you notice so many others. There are loads of Taycans around at the moment, lots and lots of Teslas, of course, of all of the different variations. I just saw a Polestar 2, EQC, and plenty of others as well. And talking Teslas, to go into this a little bit more, the supercharger network, it's kind of that for Teslas and then everything else in one bubble, and I'm sure there are some Tesla viewers watching at the moment feeling very smug that they don't often have these problems. Although the other day I saw something pretty unusual. I was at South Mims Services, which is on the M25 motorway ring road around London, where it meets with the A1M, so just to the north of London. And in the supercharger area, it was a little bit odd. If you were needing to charge up a Tesla today, unfortunately, out of luck at this supercharger. Well, there are lots of empty spaces, and there is one Tesla Model 3 parked here. It is not actually plugged in because these are all out of action. They're all out of service, not working at all, unfortunately. Lots of people coming, parking up, unfortunately failing, then heading onwards as well. There is actually a very slow charger over at the other side of the car park. There are 2 or 3 charging points, but they do not give you anything like the speed of a supercharger. But I suppose this does seem to happen to everybody, that all of these are out of service, sadly. As you can see, things were not right. Now, the interesting thing with the Teslas is if you set the navigation, it would know that the supercharger is out of action, so it wouldn't take you to that one. It would align the navigation system to take you along a route using other superchargers. But of course, lots of people just go to the one that they know without having a nav set, and would have just turned up, seen that it was empty, given it a go, had no luck, and then continued. But it is, I guess, in a way interesting that this kind of happens to everyone. Of course, up to this point, I've only been sharing my personal experience, and given I've not owned a Tesla, I've only tried supercharging once or twice. I think at Westfield in London they have one, and at the Tesla HQ just out to the west of London, and that's probably all I've ever tried with superchargers. The other thing about superchargers is they are priced in different categories and different prices in different locations, and it's very hard to actually find out what those numbers are. The Tesla website actually quotes 28 pence per kilowatt as a number, and of course that's only for Tesla customers. But in terms of the comparative with this, it is a fair bit cheaper, about a third cheaper than what I've just been doing at 42 pence per kilowatt, but it's still a lot more expensive than charging at home. And if you're talking cars of that category, that price point, that performance level, for let's say your normal Model 3, Model X, Model Y, Model S, whichever it might be, the pricing then has to be compared to a car that's more economical than a Cayman GT4. And again, the difference isn't actually that crazy. That's where I find all of this really, really intriguing. There are, of course, numerous other costs involved. I touched a little bit on the discounts with the congestion charge and with parking, but otherwise we've been talking purely about the consumption of electricity or petrol, but all of those are a very small portion of a much bigger picture. Here in the UK, for each vehicle that's registered, you pay an annual road tax or vehicle excise duty. With a combustion engine equivalent of this, it's actually a staggered setup, much more front-loaded, so it's quite complicated to work out, but let's just say it's about £500 a year on average long term. With this, that is actually waived for the time being, so that's another nice saving to be able to make with an EV. But outside of that, servicing, not quite sure what the service on this is going to cost, but obviously motors as opposed to combustion engine, you save some money with brake pads because of using the regeneration to charge up the batteries. It doesn't consume anything like the same amounts of brake wear as a combustion engine equivalent, but the fundamental topic when it comes to a car like this is always depreciation. Now at the moment we're still in the fairly early stages of the Taycan's life cycle, so it's quite hard to really tell what this car will lose over a number of years. Of course, it is going to be a fairly large amount, but the direct comparison would probably be with Porsche's Panamera, and that remains to be seen exactly how it will stack up. I suppose in many ways it will depend on the infrastructure and on the legislation as to how much demand there is for these down the line, but also how well the batteries hold up in 5 years, in 10 years, as opposed to combustion engine cars, especially older cars that are much more simple and much more easy as a result to keep running and to keep out on the roads. Today though, I did want to focus on purely the charging costs, because I find that fascinating. Yes, it's cheaper for your road tax, it's cheaper for your congestion charge and that kind of thing, but as you've come along with me again for the experience, the charging infrastructure needs a lot more work. I've said it so many times, and there are great journeys that I've had that haven't been on camera, and that is quite frustrating, so I'd love to share some more of those with you as well. But I do tend to find that something comes up, there's a queue or a little niggle or something just kind of gets in the way of that perfect experience. Now fast forward, bring an electric Cayman from Porsche, and I think that will be a superb car. Carrying around less weight will make it lighter, will make it have longer range, will make it not need quite so long long to charge up. Obviously with the improvements to infrastructure along the way, that's only going to help and make things easier, and particularly for me, as I mentioned, in the boot at the moment is a C-Tech charger that we're going to be installing at the Shmuseum so that I can finally charge this, and actually a second. We'll be able to have two chargers at the same time, and finally be able to charge during the day very quickly without stress going forwards, and I can't wait for that. It will completely open this up to being massively more usable. Basically, I have this theory that if you need to travel more than the car's realistic range in one go, like in one day, it's going to be difficult. And if you can't charge it at home overnight, so to start every morning with 100%, it's going to be difficult as well. If you can charge at home and you never need to travel more than 150 miles in a day, they are fantastic ways to get around. This car is really a delight, a dream to drive when you're going on a long distance cruise. For now though, that is all. Thank you very much for coming along for some more of my musings and experiences in the world of EVs today. I hope that shared a bit more insight as well. But that's it for this time. Thanks as always guys, and I'll see you again very soon. Cheers!